What is your favorite console? Well, for a lot of people, it's the N64. This video right here says why nostalgia doesn't explain the N64. I'll put a link to the channel down below. Let's see what they think.
Back in the day, I owned both a Nintendo 64 and a PlayStation. And I know...
Cake eater.
Now, while I loved both, the N64 has always had a special place for me. And for years, I never thought much about why. Maybe it's because Mario 64 is still my favorite game of all time, and who knows, maybe I'm just a Nintendo fanboy.
Is Super Mario 64, just Mario 64, still that good? Let's just be very honest. Okay, you can talk about it in the comments. Just let me know what an idiot I am down there.
For whatever reason, there were certain games I kept returning to, and I still feel the need to return to even now. Games like Banjo-Kazooie, Wave Race, Ocarina of Time, and of course, Mario 64. These are all games where I'm fairly certain I've seen everything they have to offer, but still, they keep pulling me back. And that's the part I've been trying to understand, because the PlayStation had no shortage of great games that I still love, but there's just something about certain Nintendo 64 games that feel different. So I started looking for the thing that kept pulling me back.
The title of this video nails it. Why nostalgia doesn't explain the N64, because that's where your mind immediately goes is, well, you're dealing with nostalgia. And nostalgia, we've talked about this many times, it is a powerful drug, the most powerful of all drugs, to the point to where people will see me and they go, man, I remember watching Screw Attack, you should bring it back. You don't want me to bring back Screw Attack. You do not want me to do that. What you're saying is, I really enjoyed being a 13-year-old kid watching you and thinking that was really fun. You enjoyed the time period of your life. And that's where, like, you know, I talk about, oh, you watch Saved by the Bell. It's comforting to me. Is Saved by the Bell a good show? It's not great, but it's something that is fun and enjoyable, right? Same with the N64, at least for me. Same with Super Nintendo. These are comforting things that I grew up with and I like. Let me know what you like, obviously, in the comments when it comes to specifically the N64. Because N64, for me, I played a lot of it, but it's not the preeminent console for me, personally.
Now, I want to start by taking the obvious conclusions off the table. The N64's built-in multiplayer was a big part of what made it so memorable.
Oh, yeah.
But it was never the entire experience for me personally. I kept going back to games like Mario Kart and Star Fox, and it's true, they both had fun multiplayer, but I never became especially attached to other four-player games like Mario Party, and while I played plenty of GoldenEye, there eventually came a point where I was just so much better than my friends that the matches stopped being much fun.
There it is right there. I was going to say, he clearly didn't have competition, right? But I'll tell you what, it'd be interesting if you talk to those friends, if they look back on GoldenEye as one of their favorite games. Well, they may have gotten drilled by you. They probably look back and go, oh man, I had so much fun playing GoldenEye. I can go back and play it all the time. And they go, oh man, all you slappers and no odd job. And, you know, they'll talk about that. And they're the guy who was like, woo, baby, I kick your ass. You know, that guy, what I'll show you later.
The point is, multiplayer was a great feature of the Nintendo 64, but it didn't create the feeling I'm talking about. Because most of the time, I was returning to these games alone. And I don't believe it's nostalgia either, because while it's true that I still enjoy playing these games today, I was already replaying them while the N64 was still current.
Okay.
And it wasn't because I had no other options. I owned a PlayStation, as I mentioned. There was always something else I could have been playing. And yet I still kept going back to certain N64 games. Now, sometimes we call that replay value.
Sure.
But that doesn't explain it either. Because of course these games were replayable. So were plenty of PlayStation games. Really, any well-designed game continues to be enjoyable over time.
I would say that the Tekken games, they're fairly dated. You know, he was just showing off a little Tekken right there. I think they're fairly dated for sure. By the way, speaking of the dad, here you go. I'm sure you guys have seen this, but this is everybody who grew up with N64. This dad over here listening to it. Oh, it's coming.
This ass play about this, Oh, shit!
It's so good. So good. All right, let's continue.
There had to be something more specific. Something that kept pulling me back even after the novelty was gone. Even after there were no more surprises left.
It's
The
comforting.
first part of the answer came to me when I was shopping at the grocery store, because a question popped into my head. Why am I always the person who gets the cart with the stupid wheel that keeps pulling to one side? You know what I'm talking about? The one where the entire time you're not thinking about what you came to buy, you're thinking about what a pain in the rear it is to push this cart around. Well, have you
Hello,
noticed
Bam.
that video game controls are very much the same way? When they feel wrong, it's so distracting, you notice immediately. But when it feels right, you stop thinking about the controller entirely. Now, we often talk about immersion as something created by graphics. The more realistic a game looks, the easier it is to believe you're inside of it. But to me, immersion is more than just what you see. And the Nintendo 64 created a different kind of immersion. It created an immersion you could feel. That's why running around the courtyard of Peach's castle in Mario 64 feels so good before you even start the main game, or why it seems like you can sense the movement of the water beneath you in Wave Race, or even something as simple as banking the R-Wing back and forth in Star Fox.
You know what's interesting about all the games he's bringing up here? They're all Nintendo games. And by that I mean they're all not just N64 games. They're all developed by Nintendo. That is the genius of Nintendo, is at the end of the day, they can look great, but they always feel good. They quote unquote play control. They always feel great.
It's like you're not just playing a game. At the risk of sounding a little creepy, it's like you're feeling it. And the reason is sitting right in the middle of the N64 controller, the analog stick. And yes, we often talk about how awkward that controller is now, but at the time, it was nothing short of revolutionary. And I thought about that in comparison with the original PlayStation, because it launched, as you know, with digital control. And I know the DualShock controller launched a few years later, but still, most PlayStation games were designed around digital input. And developers found ways to work around this. Some used fixed cameras, some used tank controls, and so forth. And these choices produced incredible games. But even great PlayStation games could sometimes feel stiff because the worlds had moved into 3D, but the controls still felt stuck in 2D. Now,
That's a really good point when it comes to Crash. I've always felt like Crash controls were good, not great. Obviously, I think Mario 64 is a very well-controlling game, but Crash controls to me were like, it's good. It's a good platformer. I know people will be like, Crash Bandicoot's the greatest game ever made. Okay, cool, but I think there is a lot of truth to that. He spoke on the N64 controller and the amount of how it's very divisive now. What are your thoughts on it? I've never enjoyed the N64 controller. And yes, I get it. Rumble Pack add-on, revolutionary, I understand what it did. I understand. But if you go back and play things, like if you were to give that controller to a kid today, they would have no idea what to do with it. If you were to give them a Nintendo controller, like an NES controller or a Super Nintendo controller, they can do something with it. I'm just saying there is definitely a barrier of entry when it comes to N64 games. They're not exactly conducive. Once again, it's that video game puberty that I was talking about, where everything's growing. We're in this awkward teen phase, and eventually we got out of it. And I like to think that's what the N64 is personally. It's like video game puberty. And same with PlayStation, that entire era.
As so many of the N64 games I still enjoy today were built around analog control as the center of their identity. Sometimes my wife and I will go to IKEA, the Swedish furniture store. Not because we need to buy anything, but because she likes to look around and I like to get a cheap hot dog.
Yeah.
But I also have this weird need to push one of their carts around. The ones I'm talking about? The ones where
I know where he's going with this. The IKEA shopping carts are perfect.
every wheel turns independently. Man, pushing one of those things is butter. And that's what a lot of Nintendo 64 games feel like to me. Once moving something around feels so satisfying. It doesn't always need something new to pull you back. Sometimes you just want to feel Mario again. Yeah, that does sound creepy.
Okay, I was just gonna say, okay, man, all right. That was one of those where you go, okay, all right, cool, man.
I'm sorry about that. The second part of the answer came to me When I was thinking about my childhood bedroom, and I promise that this part won't be creepy, but my bedroom was just the right size to feel comfortable. It was even cozy. And even though it's been about 30 years since I was last in that room, I can still remember nearly every part of it. I can remember the dent in the wall I made with a pair of makeshift nunchucks, or the wall heater I would sit in front of on a cold day and play with my action figures. I remember details like those because I knew that room completely. It was small enough that every corner felt familiar, but large enough that it still felt like my own. And many of the Nintendo 64 games I'm talking about felt the same way. I think of levels like Bob-omb Battlefield, Treasure Trove Cove, even GoldenEye's Bunker. At first, they felt enormous, and compared to earlier games, they were. But they were rarely so large that you couldn't eventually hold the entire place in your head. They stopped feeling like levels in a video game. They started feeling like a place you had been, even a place that belonged to you a little.
Also, when you're younger, you have less going on in your life, right? So those corners in your bedroom, they do mean more to you because you spend more time in your bedroom. You don't have a car. You're not going around anywhere. It's your surroundings. Same with, I think, the metaphor is true for these games as well. You spend so much time with these games. It goes back to the comfiness of them. They are comfy video games. They are comforting to you. Even though you haven't played them for a long time, you know those nooks and crannies because you've experienced them. You're familiar with them. And they're at a time in your life where you didn't necessarily have a whole lot going on compared to, wife, 2 kids, mortgage, dog, the whole thing.
Some of the best levels in N64 games hit a very specific sweet spot. It's almost like they were large enough to make you curious, but not so large that they became overwhelming or empty or impossible to remember. And I think the limitation of cartridges helped create that balance. A level in an N64 game could be large, but if it became too big, it was harder to fill every part of it with something meaningful. Now, the PlayStation, because it used CD-ROMs, obviously had more space, and it often used that extra space to keep showing you something new. But because the Nintendo 64 lacked that ability, often it asked a smaller number of places to remain interesting when you returned. Some of the best games on the system found what I feel is the perfect middle ground. I think the antithesis of this, though, was Donkey Kong 64. On paper, it feels like it should have created that same feeling even more strongly, but in many ways, it was just too big. Like a reminder of how much work you still had left to do.
That's the biggest critique when it comes to Donkey Kong 64 is that it's just a giant collectathon. That's all. Just going around collecting all sorts of crap, and it's impossible to collect everything. And those who collected everything spent way too much time playing Donkey Kong 64.
It never quite had the same pull as a game like Banjo-Kazooie, because for me, Banjo-Kazooie felt like returning to my childhood bedroom.
There it is.
Donkey Kong 64 felt like returning to that same house, but after all the furniture had been moved out. And I think that shows how delicate the balance was. A game could be large enough to explore, but still small enough to become yours. But when it was pushed too far, it stopped feeling cozy and started feeling empty.
Isn't it amazing to think about the limitations that were put on and how within those limitations, that's where you maximize creativity? Now we have access to literally, you can make your games as big or as small as you want, but there's no limitations attached to it. You just do whatever you want, which I think ultimately can be a negative.
The last part of the answer came to me when I realized how I watch TV now. Whenever my wife and I look for something to watch, you know what one of the first things we check is? The length. Not because the longer a movie or show is necessarily makes it worse, but before we choose it, we have to ask whether we actually have enough time to even commit to it. And
Yep.
I can't believe how sad it is to actually say that out loud, but such is life, especially as you get older. I realized that started affecting the way I played video games much earlier than I thought.
Oh, yeah.
My later teenage years happened right alongside the fifth generation of consoles. Between school and work and other responsibilities that slowly started piling up, I had less and less time to play games than I used to. Again, a comparison. There were plenty of PlayStation games I loved, but returning to a game on the PlayStation often meant remembering where I left off, what was happening in the story, and whether I had enough time to reach the next save point. There were times when I remember I would have preferred to play a PlayStation game in theory, but I would look at it and think, I just don't have enough time.
Like, I think everybody here on this channel has played games. Games been a big part of their life at some point. There is a point in your life where real life consumes the time that you would be playing video games, but you still want to get that taste. You still want to get that excitement. Several years ago, I got really into Apex Legends. And the reason why I liked playing Apex Legends was because I could get a game in 15 minutes, start up, get going, play an entire game, tell a story, have that story told, whether I'm good or bad or whatever, play through it, win, loss, draw, I'm done in 15 minutes, can move on. And it just kind of, just get that taste. You know what I mean? So there's something to definitely what he's telling. And I'm sure that you can relate to what he's saying right here because it happens to literally everybody.
Some of my favorite Nintendo 64 games rarely, if ever, gave me that feeling. One Grand Prix in Mario Kart, one mission in GoldenEye, one star in Mario 64. You could play for 20 minutes and still feel like you'd actually done something.
Yep.
Now again, don't get me wrong, I know the PlayStation had games like that too. But it was pushing gaming toward longer stories and cinematics, more immersion. Add to that the loading times that often came with CDs, and I think also we forget just how long that time could be. So, at least for me, returning could sometimes feel like more of a commitment than I could make. I think that's probably why I've enjoyed revisiting PS1 games through emulation, because save states and fast forwarding remove much of the time commitment that used to stand between me and the game. In a way, the Nintendo 64 kind of felt like a bridge between eras. At the time, its game
almost like video game puberty, being a teenager, going from being a child to adulthood, almost, maybe, possibly, yes.
Games looked and felt like the future, but many of them still had the conveniences of the past. Plug the cartridge in, turn it on, and just play. And I think that just became more important as I got older and had less time to give. So in the end, I guess you could say I realized I'd been asking the wrong question. I kept trying to identify what these games still had to give, but I don't think returning was ever about finding something new. It's interesting. We tend to go back to the same restaurants, order the same foods, return to places where we already know where everything is. And it's not because we're necessarily trying to relive the past. It's just that some things just fit. They just feel right. And that's what the best N64 games did for me. The way that controls felt, it just fit right into my hands. And the way the levels were designed fit comfortably into my head. And even as I got older, they still fit in with the time I had. I feel like the PlayStation at its best made me want to see what happened next. And often what happened next was incredible. But the N64, I guess I would say I always felt like it met me where I was. And that's why I kept going back to it. Not because those games reminded me of who I used to be. It's because even as my life changed, they reminded me of who I still was.
Deep, man.
So
deep.
Are there any games or systems that you keep going back to? Not because they necessarily remind you of the past, but because they still fit the way you play now. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And as always, if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. And until
And I encourage you guys to go over to OTG Gaming and subscribe like I just did right there. All right, so a lot there. I'm glad to watch that. I was kind of on the fence about watching a kind of a retro-inspired video for the channel and reacting to that because I saw it and I was like, man, I think that'd be interesting to watch. So if you guys did enjoy this type of video, looking back on, classics and kind of the theory of that, hit the thumbs up and subscribe if you're new. We'd love for you to check that out. It was really, really fun. I definitely agree with what he was saying. Is the N64 that for me? Is it this nostalgia? Is it comfy for me? Not necessarily, but that video game puberty thing that I was talking about, just think about that next time you plug in Mario 64, next time you play Ocarina of Time, next time you play Wave Race. Got a video for you here. Subscribe right here. Appreciate you guys.